So February 2004, Basecamp launches. BasecampHQ.com. Is that right?
Yes, it was. That's
and,
correct.
And you, I believe you had 45 signups, 45 accounts in 2004.
Sounds about right.
Is that about
Yeah.
right? And then by the time you got to 2006, you had 100,000 accounts.
Yes.
That was very fast growth.
And a big surprise.
It was.
Yes.
And today, I'll just add 2019 as of whatever your about page was updated.
Yeah.
3 million total accounts created.
Yes.
In 15 years. Do you have any idea how that happened?
No. I mean, truthfully, luck, timing are the number or 1 and 2. We did a good job too, but really it is luck and timing. A lot of the stuff. I think we didn't think about it at the time, but Basecamp is a very collaborative tool, obviously, which means that multiple people have to use it together, which was good for us because you invite your clients and use it with you. You've got 7 employees, they've got 14. Before you know it, that's 21 people using it. And now some people, over time, they leave their job and they go to a new place and they go, I use this thing called Basecamp, we should check it out, and it kind of spreads that way. So it was sort of a lucky thing that it turned out that you don't use Basecamp by yourself. So there's always 2 people, and that spreads. So it's all been word of mouth and organic growth. We've tried some advertising here and there, but for the most part, it's all just kind of happened.
So you almost had virality built into it without realizing it.
Yeah, I mean, now it's called that, but we just called it selling and making a product that we liked, and people talked about it. Word of mouth. I mean, it's just old school word of mouth. That was all it was. Now, we always have to put names on things now.
Yeah.
It's just word of mouth.
Yeah.
But it took a while, too. I mean, we had that first initial big ramp because timing. There was nothing else out there like it at the time. Excuse me, at the time. We had a little bit of a reputation at the time for being outspoken, so people were paying attention to us. And a lot of people were struggling with the same things we were, which is like, how do you keep people on the same page? How do you know when things are due? How do you know who's responsible for what? How do you get feedback on the record so your client, when they say yes, or when they say yes and then you do something and they say, we never said that, you can go, well, yes, you did. Here's a link to when you said that. Everyone was struggling with these things, and people still do today. And so the timing was right, the market was clear, and it kind of took off.
Did you have any idea when you built it that it would take off like that?
No.
Okay.
We had an idea that we said if we could make something like $5,000 a month after the first year, then we feel like that would be $60,000 a year, and that would be like another client. Like we'd have like another client, because we were a client services firm. We were doing web design work at the time. So we're like, if we could have another client automatically every year, paying us $60,000 a year, and we're going to use this tool for ourselves, not bad. It turned out like in a couple months or whatever, it was doing, or 6 weeks or something, it was doing $5,000 a month, and by the end of the year, it was doing a lot more than that. And by about a year and a half, it was paying for more, or generating more revenue than our consulting business was. So we stopped doing consulting. We said, fuck that, no more of that. Not interested in that anymore. And we've been doing software ever since.
And I know you don't talk about revenue today, but is it fair to say that you are doing more than $60,000 a year today?
Yeah.
Right.
We talk about revenue in a general sense. We generate tens of millions of dollars in annual profits. So we don't talk about revenue because I don't care about revenue. You can go broke generating a lot of revenue. So we generate tens of millions of dollars in annual profits, and I've been profitable every year for 20 years, so we've been in business.
Speaking of profits, you and I were talking before we got up here, and you mentioned that you had instituted a profit-sharing plan in the last couple years. How did that go?
It was a dud. Let me explain. So we've never offered equity. I'm not a big believer in it. If you're the kind of company like ours, we're not looking to sell, we're not looking to go public. There's not much liquidity there, and I feel like if you use it to replace salary, it's a little bit disingenuous. It's kind of how I see it, just my point of view. So we want to make sure we pay people really, really well and take great care of them in every possible way we can. But I'd rather just give them more money, essentially, that they can use today to pay for their mortgage and whatever, versus like the lottery ticket system, which is what equity is for the most part. But so we've been doing this for a long time, and every once in a while, employees are like, "Hey, what about profit sharing? Hey, what about profit sharing?" And it's totally a fair question. it was tricky for us because we've been very profitable for a long time. So like being profitable, this comes off the wrong way, but it's not hard for us given our margins and given our size. So right now, like, we're going to automatically be profitable. We'd have to really mess up in a bad way. So we tried to figure out how could we institute something that wasn't an automatic bonus. Because for a while we had automatic bonuses, and those don't work, I don't think. I don't think bonuses are a good idea, because if for whatever reason they go down one year, people are upset, even though it's free money. So like we tried that, and that happened, and people were upset about that, and they started thinking about their bonuses too much, and we just kind of rolled that into salary and stopped doing bonuses. Anyway, so we came up with this idea to institute a profit-sharing plan that was based on profit growth. So not just profit, because that was going to happen, but profit growth. And we established a high water mark, which is our most profitable year, and we said if we beat that, whatever delta. So I'm just going to make up a fake number. So let's say we generated $1 million in profit. It was our highest profit year ever. If we do 1.1 this year, we'll take that $100,000 difference, cut it in half, $50,000, and then split that amongst employees based on seniority. The problem was, so it sounded great. The problem is that our costs continued to go up, and that we hired some more people, and we made some investments in the cloud and some other things, and that ate into our profit margins, even though we're really profitable. So for the last 2 years, since we've instituted the profit-sharing plan, our profit hasn't beaten the high water mark, even though we're still wildly profitable. So it was kind of this exciting thing that we kind of let people down on, and I kind of regret doing it in the first place, to be honest, because people start to think about things differently when that's in place. And I don't like those thoughts. I'd much rather people just focus on doing the best work they can, and that sort of thing.
So are you going to revamp that and launch another one, or for now do you think you kind of make it up with higher salaries? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, we called it an experiment. We said we're going to try this for 3 years, which is something we almost always do when we announce something new internally. Is say like we're going to try this for X number of years, because it gives us an out to talk about it at 3 years down the road and go like, this just hasn't worked. Although maybe it will work this year, I don't know. But so this is our last year of our experiment. We'll see. We'll have to see what happens. I think if it doesn't pan out again, we will probably not do that. We've just upped our salaries across the board again, and I just feel like we take really, really good care of people, and that's enough. I know it sounds kind of harsh when I say it, but I don't think it really is. I think it's pretty fair.
That makes sense. One question, we had a call for questions before the Q&A, and folks submitted through a Google form, and one that came through multiple times, and if I don't ask it now, someone's going to ask it. So I've heard you get this question in the past. It's how would you build a SaaS today, given what you know if you were just starting out?
Well, what I would do is I do the same fundamental thing, which is I would start as small as I possibly could and stay as small as I possibly could for as long as I possibly could, and only hire people when I could afford to. This is the same advice I'd give to any business. To me, this isn't about SaaS. It could be a pizza shop in the corner or a dry cleaner or whatever it is. Although those companies, I mean, it's funny because like they're at a disadvantage because pizza shops and dry cleaners, they have capital expenses. They have to build or buy machines and whatever. We're all lucky that we make software. We don't really have to buy anything except laptops, perhaps, and that's it. So I would try to figure out what I could do on my own first and get as far as I possibly could. And I would probably do some consulting on the side, and then I would probably just try and raise some money that way through myself, and then hire somebody only when I could afford to, and just grow as slowly as I possibly could. The growth FOMO that Chris spoke about isn't only something that happens as you get going, but it's right from the beginning. You feel like if I'm only one person or two people, that I'm doing it wrong, or I'm not growing fast enough, and it's like, why? What do you mean? Why aren't you growing? What is this growth? What's this fast growth thing? Where'd that come from? So I just go as slow as I could, and if it worked, it worked. If it didn't, it didn't. I mean, it's harder today, I think, than it's ever been, even though it's cheaper and easier than it's ever been. But it's harder because there's more people doing it.
Got it. Yeah, I'm talking this afternoon, and part of my talk is about how it is harder today, and I have some slides and stuff.
Can I actually add one more thing to that? Launching something has never been easier. Running something has never been harder, I think. And I think, especially people are building new businesses, I know most people in here already have something that's going, so this isn't necessarily as relevant, but People think the build and the launch is the hard part. That's the easy part, because anyone can launch something and build something. Well, not anyone, but most people who are into this can. The hard part is then maintaining it. And you've got customers now, and you've got expenses, and you have to hire somebody, and you've got demands, and you've got requirements on your time, and all these things start to then you have your own insecurities, and you have your own doubts, and you have the competitive pressures, and you have maybe financial pressures, and that's the hard part. So staying in business is hard. Starting a business is not.
Yeah, I've often talked about launching the product not as the finish line, but as the 50-yard line. That you still have a whole, and maybe even it's your 20-yard line.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, if you're doing it for 15 years.
Yeah.
I think there's also in the funded space, people look at raising their first round as like a finish line of sorts. But as we know, that's not the case.
Yeah, they're short-sighted there, because so they have money in the bank. So what? They're gonna have to spend it all. That's what they have it for. Then they're going to run out of it, and they're going to have to get more, and then they're going to build on the stress, and the stress, and the stress, and the stress is going to build. Raising money is not something to celebrate, I don't think. It's just now a tool, and now there's expectations attached to it, and there's someone else's expectations, and celebrating other people's expectations is usually a pretty dangerous road to go down, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you've obviously been a vocal opponent of VC, or just an advocate for not necessarily taking VC and going down their path.
Yeah. Traditional VC, big money,
yep.
Especially early when you have nothing. Yeah,
yep.
I'm kind of not really for that.
There's a really good Recode Decode interview with you recently. I think was it Kara Swisher?
Yeah.
Yeah, you dug into that a lot. Now you did take, this was also another not listener question. I'm not on a podcast. It's an attendee question that was asking about, you took some money from Jeff Bezos in 2006?
Yes,
is that right?
6, yeah.
Have you ever been public about that amount?
No.
Okay. MicroConf exclusive announcement? Just kidding.
Is a few $1 million, and he's a minority investor.
Got it.
Yeah.
Do you ever, have you had regrets of doing that? I realize that's a broad question, but is that something you wish you could undo? Has it been beneficial?
Yeah, I'm not a look back regrets kind of guy. Today, I wish it was David and I running it is David and I running the business, but I wish that we owned 100% of it. Not because Jeff has any control of it. I haven't talked to Jeff in a few years. He's the easiest investor in the world to work with. He has no control over us. He has no board seats, like nothing. Like we send our numbers over to his office once a year, and they're thrilled. And like that's kind of the extent of it, which is why at this point I don't feel like there's any value that we're really giving them and they're really giving us. So at this point, today, yeah, I'd rather own 100% of our business. But in 2006, absolutely was the right decision. Because we didn't know if what we were doing was going to be a fad. We didn't know if it was going to last. And we had this great little business going. And, why not take some money off the table? By the way, the money off the table is for David and I, 2 business owners. So none of that money was ever used to fund the business at all. The money went directly into my personal checking account and David's personal checking account. So it was money, it was founder shares that we sold him to take a little bit of risk off the table so we just could breathe a bit easier. In case this all went to shit, we would still have something to show for it, which is something I think is very, very important, because a lot of companies will keep pouring their money into the company. Keep pouring it. You hear this all the time, like keep reinvesting and reinvesting and reinvesting. Well, every company dies at some point, and yours might die sooner than later. And it would kind of suck to put all this work in and keep reinvesting only to see that money be gone forever. So I'm a big believer in putting some money in your pocket as you go. And that was the quickest way we could figure out to reduce some risk, to feel good about things. If it all crashed and burned, we'd still be like, that was a good move. So do I regret it? Then no. Do I regret it today? Not regret, but I'd prefer it to be a different situation. And we've been thinking about how to do that, but we don't have any plans to do anything about it yet.
Yeah, I feel like it's easy for folks to project and to imagine that now the business is doing what it's doing, tens of millions in net profit a year. But in 2006, you just didn't know. And if it went under, it's like, what do you do right?
Yeah, I think we were doing about $1 million a year in 2006 or something like that, right? So you're like, wow, we hit that $1 million mark. This is amazing, but I don't know, this thing could seriously fall apart. I don't remember in 2006 specifically, but in 2004 when we launched Basecamp, it was like on one server in a shared server hosting company in Chicago. We're paying like $30 a month. Like, we could have. It's not like competition. I mean, they could have. Some competitor could have beat us too, but it's more like we could have just fucked it up completely by kicking a server over and losing all the data, or like who knows what would have happened. So there was so much risk early on of things going away that I think it makes a lot of sense to take some money off the table. I would really encourage people to do that.
And
it's like, hey, it's like when you're in Vegas, right? You bring $100 and you win $100. You're like, now you have $200. Put that $100 back in your pocket and go home. Or keep playing, but at least you don't lose that 100. But this idea that now I have 200, and if I lose it all, well, it was house money. No, it's not. It was your money. You had it all. So I just think it's really important to keep. It's good that we're here. I've used that analogy before, and here we are. But I'd put some money back in your pocket and keep adding that to that amount, and don't dig back into it.
SaaS, just like roulette.
Yeah,
is that what we're? That's
essentially
our headline for the thing?
It is essentially, isn't it? Yeah.
So I'm interested to hear how you
actually roulette has better odds
than SaaS. Yeah. Unfortunately. So I've started a number of SaaS companies. I sold one in 2016, and that was a way of me taking money off the table because I had parlayed one into the next. So, well, it wasn't a continuous flow of one company. It was. How do you feel? Like, do you have opinions about founders who sell? Like, are you against, doing something like that? Because you've never sold, right? And there has to be something inside your head that keeps you doing that. I'm curious.
Well, we've sold some businesses that we've started, like some products. We have spun off a few things. I think whatever people whatever works for them, they should do. So I don't have any positive or negative opinions about what anyone else does. Like, everyone has their own situation, their own context, and they're going to do what they're going to do. For me, I am very happy being a one-hit wonder, perhaps. I think it's very rare to be a hit anything, and so if I have that chance, like, I don't want to lose it. This is my lack of self-confidence in my ability to redo what I've done. I don't believe I could do again what I already did once. So, given that, I am holding on to this as tightly as I can and putting all my energy into making sure I can do this for the next 20 or 30 more years. I just think that lightning rarely strikes, and I've talked to so many founders who've sold their businesses and felt like they could never get back to that place where they were originally. And they're always pining for the old days, the good old days. They remember when the team was small and they had this thing. And I don't want to lose the good old days. And I don't know if I could ever do this again. And I also don't think I have the energy, frankly, to do it again. So why not, like, stick with your dream job? I mean, really, in many ways, like, the business is built around the kind of company that I'd want to go work for. I haven't found a better one, so I might as well keep this job. Now, that's not to say that, like, I don't love the product. Of course, I love the product, and we have some great ideas, and we're actually working on a new product, which we said we would never do, but now we're doing that. You go in waves, but I've always seen, frankly, as, like, my business journey from when I was 13 up until now I'm 44, like, as the same business. I used to sell stereo equipment and computer equipment to my friends, back when I was 14 or 15. I would go and get some stuff used and resell it to my friends. I made software to organize my music collection back in the late 90s or mid 90s, actually, and I did that, and then I just parlayed that into doing web design because I learned web design. Then I parlayed that into doing software again. It's all been one continuous thing for me. So this is more like about, I mean, technically these are all different businesses, but they're not. I think it's all the same thing, which is making something that I love, that I want for myself, and that I can sell to other people for a profit. And now I get to do it with other people, which is kind of in terms of having employees and everything. So yeah, that's me. But I know some people are serial entrepreneurs. I'm an unserial entrepreneur.
Yeah, you said you're a one-hit wonder. That's a hell of a hit, man.
Well, okay, I'm happy with that. I mean, yeah. Anyway, I think we've made other products that have been hits, but Basecamp is our biggest hit by far. So we're kind of sticking with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe one more question before I head out into the audience, and I'll call Mike up. You have recently invested in Tiny Seed, which is a fund I started with A&R, and Earnest Capital and Indie.vc.
Yeah.
And you've kind of put money into funds that are going towards this ecosystem.
Yeah.
I guess two-part question. A, have you ever invested in other startups that you can talk about? And B, what made you decide to put money into this ecosystem that's essentially helping, it's helping bootstrappers, but it's helping revenue-first companies, right, or profit-first companies?
Yeah. I've personally put money into like 2 or 3 companies run by friends. I'm not an investor though in that sense, so I don't look for investments. I'm not doing that. This is just to support some people I know and some things I like. As a company, Basecamp, we've invested in one other thing in the past, something called Starter League, which was a school based in Chicago that taught Rails. And so we put some money into that. But that was the only thing Basecamp has ever invested in, and I've only put some money into a few things. And as you know, I'm generally pretty outspoken about, or anti-VC in a traditional sense. So why you guys and a few others? I think, basically what you guys are offering is what we did for ourselves, and that we had a consulting business on the side, and that funded our little fledgling software thing, which was a side business for us. And I think had we not had that consulting business on the side initially, and that sort of free revenue or free cash flow and sort of a good amount to take a risk, we would have been looking for something like what you guys are offering, Tiny Seed and the others. But like back then, that didn't exist. And I'd originally heard from a few investors originally, and they want 40% of your business. It's just like these ridiculous numbers and too much money, and it just didn't make sense. So now that we're seeing this new crop of funding options for small business owners who have something going, who perhaps need to do it full time because it's only part time, and they can't really give it a full go unless they have a full time salary for a year or so. I'm a big supporter of that concept. I think that's wonderful. I think we're going to see a lot of great companies come from it, and maybe some of them are in this room already. So I think that's an ecosystem that's worth supporting. And for Basecamp, as sort of one of the first early ones to do it sort of this way, to get behind that is why we're putting money into a few different ones, and we're going to be championing that because I think the model is fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to transition. Round of applause for Mike Tabor, ladies and gentlemen.
Here come the tough questions.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is good cop, bad cop. So if Rob's the face, I'm going to ask the mean questions. It does that to me. So a little bit earlier, you talked about going into profit sharing and some of the mistakes you'd made with that, but you've got this 3-year cycle that you do different experiments with. Are there any of those things that you've done in the business that you've not recovered from? Like you did it for a little while or maybe 2 or 3 years, something like that, and it just not only did not work out, but you haven't been able to fix it?
I would say no, because I think like these things that we're doing, let me put you this way. There's taking a risk, and then there's putting yourself at risk. We don't put ourselves at risk. So whatever we're doing, whatever risks we're taking, they're no big deal, essentially. Like if they don't work out, we're going to be okay. We're not making these existential bets necessarily, or things that if we just pick the wrong lane, we're screwed bad. So we don't do those kinds of things. There have been other mistakes that we've made. Like there was this one thing that we did where we thought it would be awesome to give everyone a month off of work and let them sort of experiment on whatever they wanted to, and then come back and present that to the company. Like, here's what I've been working on, here's some cool ideas. And it turned out there were too many cool ideas, and we couldn't really do hardly any of them. And it turned out to be a disappointment, because a lot of people put a lot of time into stuff, and they thought it was going to be great, and they showed it, and it was great, and everyone was cheering for it, and it was fantastic, and we had to say no to like almost all of them. And so you think sometimes that you're getting into this, doing this good thing, and then you realize like that actually hurt morale. It hurt morale to give people a month off to experiment on what they wanted to do because of the way we framed it, which was like, then you're going to come up and present what you did, and maybe we'll do some of these things. And like, we have to be careful with those things because we know we can't absorb 30 projects at once. I think that's an example of just like, that was definitely a morale dent for a while. And so there's been some of those things which take longer time to recover from, but nothing that we did that like would have sunk us if we did it wrong.
Got it. Did you take a look at some of those things and like try to revamp it, or did you just kind of draw a line in the sand and say, no, we're not going to go in this direction at all? Because I'm curious about the thought process behind doing some of those experiments, and if it doesn't work out, do you try to iterate on it versus just walking away from the whole thing? Because it seems like with people involved, people have feelings and emotions about stuff. And
Yeah.
it can be really hard. Like, so for in that particular case, you could say, well, instead of doing it with the whole company, we're going to do it with a subset. And then you're picking certain people to go first, and it gets messy.
Yeah, the way I ended up seeing it was a library of ideas and inspiration. So some of those ideas made it into other things 2 years down the road. You know, we didn't know that was going to happen. We didn't revisit those things. But sometimes an idea gets planted in your head, and then you go, oh, you know what? That was a clever idea. Now we're in this position where we're working on this other feature that kind of is similar to that. That was a clever way, and then you kind of pull some things in. So I think all those things colored everything else we were doing at some level, but we don't typically just don't implement a raw idea anyway. We like, here's an idea, and then we kind of get into it and start to figure it out and kind of dig deeper. But I think that fragments of those things can be found in our products now.
Got it. So when you were, and I realize this was probably a while ago at this point, but when you were at $1 or $2 million ARR, what were some of the key things that you did that you feel like propelled you from 2 to 10 million, for example, and even beyond that, and things that you did well, and then things that in retrospect you look at it and say, we just made some really poor decisions, we could have done that very differently and improved on it. And I'm just curious, like, what some of those things are, because it seems like there are not plateaus, but different levels where you do certain things for your business, and then, but they're not viable until you get to much further along.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the sort of the mistake first, I guess. We immediately, so from 2004 we launched Basecamp, 2005 we launched Backpack, 2006 we launched Campfire, 2007 we launched Highrise. So we built 4 separate products in 4 years. And while I don't think that was a mistake, it definitely took our eye off the ball a little bit, although during those times we were growing healthy growth for Basecamp. But still, it took our eye off the ball, and I think that it's hard to necessarily measure the impact of that. It's more about the mindset it begins to instill in people, which is that we're going to be building new things all the time. And you kind of can't build new things all the time, right? A lot of work is mundane maintenance, subtle improvements, and we enjoy that, but it's not the most exciting thing in the world. And so I think we set ourselves up early on to not be able to deliver on that kind of cadence long term. So I think there was a little bit of that, which was sort of something that didn't quite work. Secondly, with Backpack, which is our second product, which was a consumer product, Basecamp was a business. We sold it for $5 a month, which is a terrible idea. I implore you all not to sell anything for $5 a month. It's very, very, very hard to make a business out of that price tier. And consumer customers are typically very, very price sensitive. And anyway, we kind of did that. That was not our most successful product. We actually also built Rightboard, and we built Tadalist. We built a bunch of other things. Anyway, took our eye off the ball, tried to get in the consumer thing, which was the wrong call. And at some point, we let Basecamp sit a little bit because of that, because we were focused elsewhere. We weren't working on 4 continuous products at the same time. We would shift our entire focus onto something else for a while, and shift our entire focus, and move back to Basecamp for a while, and then shift our entire focus. That's all we could do, because we had like 8 people or something like that, which is what I would actually still recommend people do if they're moving between things. We found that this idea of we call it TikTok development, this idea that you work on something for a while, and you let it sit for a while, and you move on to something else, and you come back, brings a new sense of perspective to the thing when you return to it. I think it's a more healthier way of doing it. Anyway, we're spread thin, gotten this sort of consumer thing. As far as growing the thing, how that happened, I really don't know. I would say that I think that because we're outspoken and opinionated, and blogs were beginning to become a big thing back then, we wrote a couple books, and we did a lot of speaking, and we shocked people with our ideas early on. Now some of these things are more mainstream, but early on they were not. That you just draw attention to yourself, and that, who are these guys? Who's this guy? Well, who's this idiot? Like, whatever, and they're like, BasecampHQ.com. Oh, okay, or 37 Signals at the time, and you just draw attention. I think that's what happened. Yeah.
So you mentioned, some of these other products that you built. It's funny you mentioned Tadalist, because I actually came across that in my bookmarks the other day when I was cleaning them out a little bit.
It still works.
Yeah, and it does still work. But what happened with Highrise? Because you built that, and then you spun it off, and then I believe you brought it back in?
Yes. So Highrise CRM tool we built in 2007 is our second most popular product in terms of revenue, customer base, everything. Great business. But back in, 2012, 12, I might be getting the dates wrong. Actually, I don't know, 5 years ago or something, maybe. We decided to go all in on Basecamp. So we still had all 4 products. And we decided that we're going to rename the company to Basecamp from 37 Signals. We're going to focus on one thing. We're going to get back, just kind of like Chris was talking about focus, getting back to focusing on one thing. And with that, we decided to sell, spin off, or combine products. So Campfire, real-time chat, built that into Basecamp 3. Okay, so that product kind of went away and became part of Basecamp 3, the current version of Basecamp. Backpack, it was a small product. We just said we're just going to sunset that. It'll always be available. We're never going to improve it again. Highrise, on the other hand, is a multi-million-dollar business, very profitable, very, very solid business. And that business was too good to just, like, we didn't want to incorporate into Basecamp. We didn't want to bring CRM into Basecamp. That would dilute Basecamp. It was a great business, very profitable. So we thought, like, we have to spin this off or sell it. We tried to sell it, but we didn't want any of our team to go with it because we wanted to keep our team. So even though there's a lot of people who wanted to buy it, all the usual suspects, they wouldn't buy anything without a team. They just didn't want the software.
I can't imagine why.
Well, I can't imagine why either now, but at the time I'm like, you're going to get this great cash flow. Like, it's just throwing off cash. Like, just staff it up. Like, big deal. But anyway, they didn't want to. So then we decided to spin it off, still 100% owned by Basecamp, found a CEO, Nathan Contney, who built up a team, and he started running Highrise for 3 years. And then we decided we weren't quite seeing it, didn't quite see the future we wanted to see with it over time. So we ended up bringing it back in-house. And now we're running it again in-house. But it's essentially sunset, which means that, like, it will always be around, just like Backpack, but we're not putting active development into it. We'll keep it up in terms of security and that kind of stuff and bug fixes, but we're not actively developing it. But those customers who are on it never have to leave. And this is one thing I'll say real quick about that I don't like about our industry, especially the big guys like Google. They kill products all the time, and they leave customers out in the cold, and that's uncool. So we've decided that we will always, forever, what we call until the end of the internet, support every product we've ever built. We'll always keep it around as long as there's at least one customer paying for it, and we'll always support the product, even if we're not actively developing it anymore.
Can you answer how much money you guys were looking for in terms of being able to sell it?
Sure.
I don't need like an exact number. I'm looking for
A multiple?
Well, not a multiple, like a range. Was it like $1 million, $5 million plus, $10 million plus? And it could be way off. I don't think it makes a difference. I'm just saying.
I'll tell you.
And the reason I'm asking, I'll qualify this because we get a lot of questions to the podcast about, I'm going to hire some developers to work on this, and I don't want them stealing my code and running off and building a business next to it.
Yeah.
And what I think is fascinating about your answer is that it could be worth millions or tens of millions, but without the team behind it, nobody's willing to pay for it.
Right.
So
it's very true.
It
We
seems
found that
interesting
out.
that.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that at its high watermark, and I will not tell you when that was or is. Sure. I think Highrise was doing something like 11 or 12 million a year.
Okay. So $11 or $12 million a year business, and people were not willing to buy it without the team.
And
the code is worthless.
Yes. And let me put, and not only that, but like we basically had 4 people working on it. So if you think about the margins, they're 90-something%, and still people didn't want it. I mean, they would have paid a certain price, but I wasn't going to give it away either.
Sure.
But we felt like our multiple was totally fair, and they still wouldn't buy it without the team. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind.
Right. So one more question. I think we'll go to Rob in the audience after that. But you'd mentioned earlier that one of the things that you do not look at in Basecamp is the revenue, because revenue can mean a lot of different things. You really focus on profit. Are there other metrics that you use to measure how well both the business and the product are doing?
We don't look at metrics that often. So first of all, annual profit is kind of our number one thing we look at. We do look at sort of, do we have a leaky bucket or not? Like, are we building more customers than we're losing? That sort of thing. We look at that. We look at active account growth. We look at some of these things, but we don't have targets or goals. We don't have KPIs. We don't have whatever the other acronyms are. We just try to do the best job we can. And so we're aware of these things. And if something seems like it's slipping a bit more than we're comfortable with, we start thinking about what could we do to improve that versus setting up targets beginning of the year and trying to hit those. We just don't find that we're motivated by that kind of guesswork. I've never been a big believer in goals personally. I don't have any. I've never had any, truly, and our business doesn't have any. I think goals are typically things that you stress about, and you either, if you don't hit them, then you're upset. If you hit them, you just come up with a new one, and you stress about that one. Like, that seems like a bad thing to have in your life. So I just try to do the best work I can, period. And that's, because I have to set up a goal, I shouldn't be working harder because I set up a goal. I should be working hard on something because I want to do that thing. That's just how I've always been. I know it's unusual, but.
So you're really just looking at these metrics and watching them over time, and if something seems like it's trending in the wrong direction or going below a certain point, which you're looking at historical measurements to
Yes.
say, is this too low? Then you go back and start to address it, but otherwise.
Yeah, so we don't look at things on a month-to-month basis, for example. We kind of look at things annually, a couple times a year sometimes, and like, hey, this curve's a little bit flatter than we'd like or something. Like, what can we do about that? Now, part of that is because we're fortunate that we have a big cash cushion and we have very high margins and we're very profitable, so you can afford to be a bit sloppy. And I like sloppiness. I think it's a healthy thing to have some slop in there, basically. Which basically means you don't have to. It comes back to stress. Like, I don't think it's healthy to worry all the time. I mean, it's not that I don't think it. It isn't healthy to worry all the time. So, in some ways, we keep our company as small as we possibly can intentionally. Therefore, we have higher margins and we can afford to be wrong more frequently. We can afford to be sloppy because I just feel more comfortable that way, rather than like being on this razor thin edge where like you have to get it right and you have to be looking at your numbers every day or every week, otherwise you're screwed. Now, that said, when you're starting a business, it's a little bit different, I think, especially when you have like 30 grand left in the bank. That's totally different place, but I'm just telling you about us today.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, Daniel.
You got most of the way there with the question that I was going to ask, but so you turned off sign-ups for Highrise about a year ago. You spun out Know Your Team. You turned off sign-ups for all these products. Why start another one? Like, where's that motivation coming from, and why is this one going to be different?
Yeah. Well, so for us, we only build things that we need and we want, and things that scratch an itch. And there's this thing that we do every single day, that everybody here does every single day, that is so full of hacks and workaround workflows and confusing messes that we all just completely put up with because we've become so numb to the reality of how bad it is that we were sick and tired of doing that every day. I know I'm being very vague, but it's probably the most ambitious thing we've done because the category is dominated by the biggest players in the world, and we just have a very different take on it, and we're sick of using their stuff. And we think we have solved some of the problems that people put up with that they don't even know they have. But when they see, they'll go, oh, fuck yeah, of course, this sucks. Why do I have to deal with this every day? So that's why. We just have a really, really, really scratchy itch or whatever that we want to do. And we're going to build it for ourselves. And if no one buys it, that's fine too. Just like Basecamp was not built for anybody else. Initially, it was built for us. But we've decided that we want to do that. Secondly, I'll say, is another really quick point, is that we think it's really valuable to do this TikTok development thing, which we lost. So since we've been working on Basecamp nonstop for 4 years, what ends up happening is you get to a point in a product where you have your entire machinery of your entire company working on marginal improvements. And at some point, you realize that we could all be utilizing our skills better by putting that into something else for a while, learning some new things, trying some new things that you can't try with what you have because you just can't mix it up too much, and then be able to come back. So we're going to get back into this 2-product cycle where you can kind of go back and forth. That's at least the theory.
Question over here.
And I'll make these answers quicker. I'm sorry, there's only a few minutes.
Sort of related. We're a team of 2. We have 2 product. We just launched a new product last summer, and we've been at the first product for 2 years. But I was curious about the TikTok thing. I'm assuming it's not a fixed thing, but I was curious about if you have some sort of structure, any sort of structure around like how you decide to spend time on which things and for how long, or have had that in the past.
There's no fixed number. It's more like how does it feel? So for example, when you're going to launch something, we're kind of all in on launching this other thing, which is like a few months out, let's say. So we're all in on that. So Basecamp is in the best position it's ever been in. It can stay on its own for a few months. Like, that's totally fine. This idea that you have to be improving things every day, I don't know. I don't buy that. So it can sit for a while. We'll go do this other thing. We'll launch that for a little bit after that. We'll have to pay close attention to that. And then we'll come back to Basecamp and we'll kind of see how things go. Maybe we'll split the team down the middle, and half will work here, half will work there. But for now, we want to kind of go all in on one thing. So it kind of just depends, I would say. But I know that there's this tendency after you launch something brand new, your first product, there's this tendency to get back in there and do the next one, because like you want to get back to that excitement, because it's kind of mundane. Improving at something you've already launched is kind of mundane, so you want to get back to that excitement of launching something new. I would just be careful not to lose your focus in the early days, because that's really when, like, that's those are the foundational years. And if you don't have the right things in place there, it's hard to grow down the road.
Next question over here.
Could you clarify for me, with those large profits that you talk about, is there a specific percentage of those profits that you put back into the company, or is most of that David get a check at some point and like, okay, that's our reward for not having sold this company in the past, is that we get this very large check. So like, you putting it back in the company, or like reward?
Sure. Well, a little bit of both. So some things we just sort of we'll spend more money on during the year because we want to experiment with something. So that's the putting it back in. But we don't, like, at the end of the year, we don't put some aside. We put a little bit aside to pay like January's bills, and then we're an LLC. So I pay personal income tax on the profits, and David does, and so does Bezos. So we distribute the profits that are left over at the end of the year to the owners. Now, your point is great, because some people will do the math and go, that's a lot of money every year. And I would say it is, but we could sell the business for whatever. I don't know what the number would be, but it'd be a large number. And we're basically, it's kind of like we've won the lottery in a sense, and we're taking the distributions as we go versus taking the lump sum. Because there's benefit to me going as we go, which is I get to have a great job, and our employees get to have a great job. We get to improve the product over the time. We get to make customers happy. We get to change businesses' trajectories and stuff like that's exciting too. So that's a payoff that you don't get if you sell. And then I'm left at 44 years old, not knowing what to do. That's not interesting to me. So that's kind of why we do it that way.
I've seen you blog about it or talk about it a little bit in other places where you've essentially, the way you framed it is really like Basecamp gives you a platform to do things that are interesting to you, versus if you were to take a lump sum of money, then you'd have to fund everything and it may or may not work out. And you're kind of left paying the bill at that point, versus with Basecamp, it's like you've got a team there that allows you to the flexibility to kind of make those experiments.
For sure, and I believe Basecamp's the best product in the world for what it does, and I want to keep making it better and better and better and better and better, and I want to keep introducing it to new people, and so I'm totally motivated to make it better and everything, and I can't do that if I sell it. If I sell it, I have to go work somewhere else for 2 years and be completely miserable, probably, because I'm pretty much unemployable, and so that's never worth it to me. So yeah, so the answer is yes, we could take some, also put some more into the business by doing some experiments and that sort of thing as well.
So we'll take one more question, and then we're going to break for lunch.
When did you first make an iPhone app for Basecamp, and why did you wait until that point?
I don't remember the year, but we made it was before 2008, because, I'm sorry, it was before 2012, because I think it was probably 2009, 2010. iPhone came out in 2007 or something like that. We made one for Basecamp Classic, which is the first version of Basecamp, which we stopped working on in 2012, 8 years after we launched it. So it was around that time. It was a web app, 100% web app. We just wanted one for us. It was crappy and slow, but it was totally a fascinating project because we learned a lot about how to do it. And then all the future versions have been really good, but the initial version was slow, but it was a few years in after the iPhone launched. I think today, of course, you've got to launch with mobile support, but back then it was a totally different time. And one more thing I'll say, if I can, just one quick one. The other thing that we noticed is that back when we were getting started in 2004 through 2008, we'd made 4 products, 5 products, 6 products, depending on how you count. We didn't have to have mobile versions. So we actually had 4 or 5 or 6 products, but the moment the iPhone came out, you basically have to multiply everything by 2. Now you've got to have 2 versions of everything, desktop perhaps and mobile. So now the 5 or 6 products we have is really 12 code bases to maintain. Then Android comes out. Now you've got like, for millions of things to deal with that are all different code bases, and it's like way overwhelming. And that was one of the reasons we decided to go back and scale back just to Basecamp, because we did not want to manage literally dozens of code bases across multiple products and multiple platforms with our team size at about 40, 45 at the time. Now we're at 55, but that's sort of it. So it was just impossible to deal with mobile and desktop with multiple products with a small team.
Thank you very much, Jason.
Yeah, thank
Thanks
you.
for coming.